And now our next guest is Areije Shakar, the head of the Waha sovereign fund out of Bahrain. Areije, how are you?
Well, I'm doing actually quite well. I think a year in working from home, and I guess we've become much more accustomed to being able to do business I guess, just remotely, especially within the VC space. Um, we used to think that, we need to always be in person, but there is a great deal of work that can be done remotely. So it's been quite an interesting past year, just adjusting to the changes.
I caught you recently on a panel for the Atlantic Council. I was certainly struck by the passion and determination of the panelists. Are you seeing a distinct imprint emerging for investors that are very separate to ecosystems in Europe and the US? You certainly were talking with a lot of passion and determination to get things done. I wonder if you're seeing the beginning of something quite special in the region.
So I think there's actually obviously, I'm not going to say it's completely different to the other ecosystems, but of course, every ecosystem has its distinction because we're an ecosystem that began or started to form after some of the other ecosystems in US and Europe were formed. We had a lot of learnings that we could easily kind of import and have a knowledge transfer to kind of bring us up to speed. I think where it's very interesting when it comes to the VC investment here is that we've kind of accelerated the growth between trying to get the angel investors interested in venture capital to actually having very sophisticated venture capital funds based out of MENA and across the GCC. So like you were mentioning, there's definitely a lot of passion for venture capital because we've all, basically GCC countries very much focused on the oil and gas industry and trying to move away from those industries and focus on the private sector and SMEs. Venture capital plays a big role in fueling these startups and when it comes to a technology-based economy. And so I guess what's distinct in our region is the fact that we are using venture capital and technology to help empower the other industries that we didn't kind of, I guess, jet start in the past. And so what we've also noticed is that it's kind of been a dormant characteristic. It's very much in the DNA of the people of the GCC when it comes to trade and being entrepreneurs. And it's now just taking it a notch up to actually focusing on being innovative when it comes to technology. And then, I think also during the Atlantic Council discussion, we talked about like how there's a lot of like Me Too businesses when it comes to technology that are being funded through venture in MENA. And I don't think it's a Me Too because a lot of these businesses are customized for our culture, our nuances, and the way we like to undergo certain type of services. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. If something has been developed in another place and then it's being imported and then tweaked to be adjusted to what we require here, is also some form of innovation. So, sometimes it can be just that small little level of change that ends up getting a patent and becomes much more successful. And it could be two identical types of base businesses. So there is definitely a distinction here because, our motivation and the change that's happening is a little bit perhaps different than the other ecosystems.
Following on from that, are we then seeing certain trends emerging in Bahrain that are distinct from other nations in the region?
So, Bahrain obviously is smaller in size and also in population. So from market size, it is obviously different than its neighboring countries. So of course, perhaps in volume of the number of startups being funded, it'll be lower. And that's just natural because, statistically, if you have less people, less startups, obviously less will get funded. But I think what we've noticed is that just recently a startup, Tarabat Gateway, that was based in Bahrain and has now expanded into the UAE, received one of the highest rounds of funding in 2021 at their stage. And so there are elements where Bahrain starts to hit that. And then where that is particularly the expertise or we see the strength is usually in the fintech companies. So we have quite a progressive regulator, and they've set up the first of its kind fintech sandbox a couple of years ago here in Bahrain. And we see a lot of fintech companies across the globe that are sitting in that sandbox and testing out their services as they look into expanding into the GCC. So we're very much seeing how Bahrain, when it comes to venture capital, especially when you talk to a lot of the other VC fund managers, it's kind of a sweet spot for them to have even their underlying portfolio companies that are focused on fintech to try to go into the Bahraini sandbox and get approved by the regulator and then springboard into the other jurisdictions.
Certainly investors here would understand the importance of initiatives like sandboxes, but Bahrain seems to have been ahead of the curve with regards to sandboxes perhaps used as an FDI mechanism or in bringing in overseas businesses. Is this something that you are looking to accelerate?
So, I think Bahrain has, continuously looked at, collaborating and working very closely across various markets, and predominantly first, obviously, to our neighbors, which is that, it's first off. But also looking at, how we can build bridges across markets when it comes to venture capital. I think the easiest play is to work with other peers, so other sovereigns that are looking to also help develop their ecosystems, but also some of the top tier or top first or second tier funds that are based in the US and Europe that are looking at the GCC as an emerging market and how we can help build those kind of relationships. So, it's not necessarily that, they will perhaps invest or fund any of the companies here because it might not be in their remit, but their underlying companies might be looking to expand into emerging markets. And that's kind of the whole idea of letting people get to know Bahrain and the wider region. I think one thing that I've started to come accustomed to ever since I've been leading the Waha fund is the importance of that engagement. So a lot of these fund managers probably never used to put Bahrain on their process or thought map. But us having them engage in our ecosystem, get to know our startups, that's how they've been starting to actually access funding, which is one of the mandates of our fund of funds, is to create that access to funding. We're not going to claim that we're the experts and we're not going to tell people to invest in certain companies, but what we can do is ensure that there is that kind of engagement and that relationship building, because when the opportunity does present itself, these top fund managers will definitely jump on the opportunity and I won't have to even convince them. And so it's obviously partnerships are very important to just build that kind of awareness and that kind of cross-border understanding, because when you're very focused on your ecosystem, you don't necessarily know everything about all other ecosystems, and it's through this relationship building that can come to fruition.
Are there any particular funds that you would draw attention to that you see as being particularly important in this way of doing things?
We've invested in Finch Capital, which is a European-based fintech fund. And so although they're kind of globally focused more into Europe and Southeast Asia, they do look at emerging markets. And so our relationship with them from the onset has very much been focused on knowledge transfer and working with also our underlying LPs on realizing their own digital transformation strategies, because they are coming from perhaps more mature ecosystems that have undergone some of the journeys that our institutions, our financial institutions are going through right now. And because they're a fintech focused fund, it's very easy for them to showcase some of their underlying portfolio companies that we can transfer over, but also just their experience, understanding the formation of companies, reviewing investment opportunities. And that is something that's kind of invaluable. And so regardless of the investment that we've made, that kind of knowledge that you gain by building these kind of partnerships is very important. And of course, we have a myriad of funds in our pipeline that we work with. But I just wanted to kind of highlight Finch because it was our first outside of the MENA region fund that we invested in. We've also invested in MSA Capital, which is based out of China. So another market that we're looking at. And in terms of just bridging markets, obviously they're also looking for emerging markets to have their portfolios transfer into the region. But more importantly, it's again that knowledge transfer, understanding how companies can succeed in China and in Southeast Asia. So it's an important conversations to have, and that happens through these kind of investments. MSA has also actually invested in companies in the MENA region, also in Bahrain, and that's also been through engagement. Our conversations together, and they continue to be very active across MENA.
There is definitely a theme running through what you were saying around the development of an entrepreneurial society in the region. Is that a government-led process, or is it down to local entrepreneurs and funds and kind of a natural organic growth?
Look, I think that's the ambition and the hope. I think Bahrain definitely has all the ingredients to be that, to position itself as a financial fintech hub. It's in the past been a hub for financial services with a lot of talent and expertise. A lot of the financial institutions' headquarters were based in Bahrain, and then for other reasons have moved on to other countries across the GCC. But you will come to find that there's a lot of talent in the financial services. I think one probably missing ingredient is probably a lot of tech talent that can help develop. So I think we have a lot of individuals that work within the financial sector that probably can identify a lot of pain points that they want to solve for, but need to partner with that CTO to be able to come to bring it into life. And I think that's happening. I think also through our sandbox, a lot of people are noticing that Bahrain is well positioned. People get it here. You hear startups going to speak to different banks to see if they want to be able to take on their services. And a lot of times they come out and say, actually, the guy actually understood what I was talking about, which comes a lot with the fact that, it's a very rich in experience and has a history in financial services. So the people that work here, have not only studied it by profession, but also, just working in these institutions. There's a lot of apprenticeships and a lot of knowledge transfer that has happened over the years through the various professionals that work in banks. So I think that if we continue to keep these open dialogues between our regulator and the startups, and then continue to provide that access to funding from a venture capital perspective, and then ensuring that talent wants to come and join the companies here in Bahrain and facilitating that. Bahrain continues to be a great place for expatriates to live in. And so, we do have all of the ingredients. I think it's just a matter of time, and we need to ensure that we keep that momentum going to reach that kind of, to hold that torch or that position.
Bahrain is becoming a more entrepreneurial society. I think that's fairly evident, and you're talking about some of the innate qualities of trade in the region. Is this a kind of government-led process of change, or is it, people following the entrepreneur in the region and the kind of funds coming around them?
I think it's a bit of both. I think obviously the government has been working very hard on this since they issued the Vision 2030 back in 2008, if I recall correctly. And so there's been a great push for building awareness around entrepreneurship. And then, when I joined the bank, the Bahrain Development Bank back in 2010, the word becoming an entrepreneur or entrepreneur was very much, I would say, foreign and not much encouraged in households, because why would you leave your secure job to go start your own business? But now 10 years later, it's now become a source of pride. So the reason being is that because we have it in our it's innate in our DNA, being entrepreneurs, being as part of the world, but also there's a mindset that needs to be changed, because for so long it was encouraged, it was a source of pride to either work in the government sector or to find a job to work in. But at the end of the day, with that change of mindset, you're starting to see that families are much more proud of their children or their spouses when they're actually leave their job, and there's a bigger element of a support system. And that is also I think hasn't been a better time to start your business, because there's a lot of government support when it comes to grants, different accelerators that have set up in Bahrain that are now all run to help support companies come to life. And then you also have the fund of funds that creates that access to funding. And so we don't invest directly into companies, but we invest into funds that will invest into these companies, and we create that kind of access to funding through that. And there's a lot of VCs across the region. Like 3 years ago, I could count on one hand, the top strong funds that were investing in GCC or MENA. Now I have a large list to go through, and that's good, and it's perfect because it's creating competition between fund managers. It's creating a level of governance, and now startups actually have a choice. They don't have to be forced to take a term sheet. And so in Bahrain, it's definitely, it started government-led, but now the private sector has now taken over and pushing, because of the change and the shift in the mindset that has happened.
Okay. Just one final question for you, and quite apt as I'm sitting in a slightly cold, slightly dark studio with can see the weather outside. How are things in Bahrain? I think you're well aware that us Brits love to travel, and the lockdown is fairly shortly coming to an end here, we hope, obviously. So what's the situation like in Bahrain, and will we be able to meet sooner rather than later?
Well, so, in Bahrain, I guess we're in a semi-lockdown. I don't think it's a full lockdown. We have very controlled, dining restrictions, and, the capacities have to be limited, and we can't throw huge parties or concerts and things like that. But travel is open. So Bahrain is, I think, on the green list to go to the UK, so you can safely come here and travel back. We have a new airport that just opened up this year, and so it's beautiful, and I hope for a lot of people will start to use it. I guess the vaccination rollout has been successful here as well, I'm sure, as it has been in the UK. I think once all of that starts to stabilize and we have the numbers kind of stabilize across the globe, it will happen soon. But as of today, you can book your ticket and come over to Bahrain, and then you can go back to the UK without quarantining. So, there is quite a rigorous system put in place when it comes to entering. You take a PCR test on arrival, and when you leave, you have to take one too. So, we've done a good job with the whole, COVID, I guess, protocols here in Bahrain. I think, if Brits like to travel, definitely Bahrainis do too, because we are quite a small island. So there's not far for us to travel. When I speak to my friends in the UK, they've taken the car and driven into, the countryside, and there is that option. It's very hard for us, especially with Saudi being also closed off, with a little bit of the borders opening up, but it's not, obviously as flexible as it used to be. So I think we'll definitely be traveling over to the UK once things start to open up over there as well.
Fingers crossed. I'll be on the phone to my travel agent as soon as we finish up. But Areije, thank you so much for your time. Great talking to you as always, and fascinating insight.
No, thank you so much, James, and I'm glad we were finally able to connect.
Fantastic. Thank you.